look at me, I don't look like most composers in classical music. I'm not white, I'm a woman, and I'm alive. Most composers that we think about, Beethoven, Mozart, they're not alive, right? And I'm hearing impaired. There are people that are amazed when I tell them that I was born with a hearing loss, and I wear hearing aids. The first time I was fitted with hearing aids was when I was 5 years old. For the first few years of my life, I didn't speak. I vocalized strange sounds, but I really wasn't able to hear enough to be able to pick up speech. And when this was caught, I had just started kindergarten. Becoming a composer was definitely a step-by-step process. I was born with the ability. There's a music gene that's floating around on my father's side of the family. And I still hear stories about his mother and his uncle having the ability to sit down and compose at the piano. We normally call this improvisation, but for me it's a type of composing. I was known as the one in the house that could quickly extemporize from a tune that somebody might whistle at me, or repeat something I've heard from a Peruvian music concert that was quite an important part of my backdrop. When I began writing down the music and began thinking about composition as a career choice, a vocational path for me, was the summer before my last year in high school, when the San Francisco Conservatory, in its original location on Ortega Street, was advertising a music composition program for pre-college students. So I went ahead and I signed up for this, and overnight I changed everything. I saw prodigies for the first time, little kids playing piano and violin like nobody's business. And I realized that the ability to extemporize, having perfect pitch, was something that was a bit more perhaps unique. We do a good job in this country of finding performing talent, but perhaps pay less attention to those that are budding composerly talents. And I realized that I didn't see people that looked like me as well. Even in the multicultural and diverse San Francisco Bay Area, I didn't see a lot of Latinas that were in this conservatory environment. And I just had this instinct that the world needed me. They needed me to go into an environment that didn't represent multiracial, Latina identifying individuals like myself. So I had no idea what the life was going to be like, but I came home, I remember my heart was beating. I grew up in that day, and I told my parents this was something that I felt like I needed to do, and I had their support, and that's how I decided to be a composer. If I saw a guitarist from my mother's country playing music, I watched this, and I would take this motion. I would come to the piano, and I would do the same thing. And so nobody does that. What would happen if piano and guitar had a baby? It would be this kind of music. So I wanted to invent a new kind of music. And I had people say, you can't do that, that's not classical. Or even Peruvians. People from Peru said, you can't do that, that's not Peruvian music. And then I had some people go, wow, that's really cool. Detroit Symphony is one of them. They said, come and write music for us. I've been wanting to write a concerto for orchestra for a very long time. Two of my favorite pieces are the Bartók Concerto for Orchestra and the Lutoslawski Concerto for Orchestra. The Lutoslawski is a piece that is the first symphonic work I've ever heard live, and it made just an enormous, iconic impression on me. And the timing of Walkabout, I think, is really poignant because it comes in the early months of the new president's regime in the United States. The months leading up to the election were really stunning for me to see how divided my country had become, and I'd always considered myself such a patriot, really appreciating the fact that I think only in the United States would you see a story like mine where you have a hearing impaired, multiracial Latina, daughter of a South American immigrant, daughter of a Jewish man, making a living now writing symphonies. I think this is something that could only happen in the United States. So my reaction, I think, to the division, the divisive talk that we've been hearing so much in the United States was to come out really big and bold with something I think is very beautiful about my mother's culture, and that are the sights and the sounds and the music, the mythologies of this small Andean nation of Peru. So this is a really virtuosic, bold, vibrant piece that draws on Peruvian motifs and reflects my travels, my many trips that I've made over the years. It's in 4 big movements. I pick on different members of the orchestra in each of the movements, people that I got to know while I was composing in residence with the Detroit Symphony over more than 3 seasons. The first movement is the Soliloquio Serrano, which means mountain soliloquy. It uses the voices of the principals of each of the string sections backed up by the rest of the orchestra as a band. It's really lyrical, it's really poignant. It uses a rhythm of da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, but in a very lyrical kind of way. And it's almost a prayer. And it's something that ushers in the rest of the piece, about 5 minutes long or so. The second movement is the scherzo, or the light and very fleet and fast-moving work called huaracas. Huaraca is the slingshot weapon instrument of the Incas. And they use these in warfare. They use these as a tactical contest kind of instrument for the young men to prove their prowess and their accuracy. And so the movement is really fast and virtuosic. There's a really large percussion battery that's extremely important. It's in sections. If you're familiar with composers from South America and the classical tradition, you might see just hear a whiff of the music of Alberto Ginastera himself, who was really inspired by the Pampas, or the great plains of Argentina. And you have this kind of vastness and panoramic, fast movement sound to the huaracas movement. The third movement is the heart of the piece. This is the adagio, or the slow movement. And this is the ayi. Ayi is actually a Quechua term, so not Spanish. 40% of Peruvians speak Quechua, which is the Indian language that we have inherited from the Incas. And this is very string-oriented, it's really soulful. And ayi is a prayer. So this is something that draws on an uplifting vocal movement that you would see in a lot of the priests of both the Christian and pre-Christian or the pagan religious spiritual beliefs of Peru. And then the last movement is the one that is a real tribute to the aforementioned Concerto for Orchestra by Lutoslawski. It uses a constant drum beat after a mysterious opening in my own way. And I think in a previous life, both Bartók and Lutoslawski were Latinos. When I hear the rhythms that they use, and I feel a real kinship with these gentlemen of European ancestry. And in this movement, which is the tarqueada, it's inspired by tarca flute parades that are noisy and cacophonous. You hear a lot of drums of all types. You hear the tarca flute that again has the da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da motif, but this time really brash and bold. And the piece builds to a huge conclusion until the music is out, suddenly with just a dying figure only in the basses. Because I got to know the bass section well at Detroit as well. Composers in residence have to be prepared to be able to be of service in ways that are unexpected and sometimes in ways that you feel not equipped to be able to do, and you can surprise yourself. And I was certainly feeling that when I met the community at the American House Living Centers, which is a senior citizen living center that has various chapters all through the state. When they told me that this was a group of senior citizens that often were the wives of veterans or were veterans themselves, I wasn't sure that I was the right person for something like this. Growing up in Berkeley in the aftermath of the Vietnam War protests, Berkeley was a center that really questioned the need for going to war and whether we needed to be sending our soldiers, many of them to their deaths. This was the beginning of conversations about racial divisions within the military, and so I wasn't sure that I was the right person. And after about 30 minutes talking with these wonderful, wonderful people, I just fell in love with them. I fell in love with their patriotism. I fell in love with the vision of America that they had. I felt no walls whatsoever, and that had to do with their willingness to embrace me and to see me as a valid reason for them having gone to war. And that was a really incredible realization and an important one for me to make. So when we devised this project, knowing that music can be a wonderful point for different people to meet and have a conversation, emotionally and intellectually, creatively and conversationally about what is meaningful for them, Dan and I, Dan being the awesome choral director with American Anthem House, we came up with a plan of actually using the stories of the community residents for the piece that I would write for them. And so he spent several months culling together their memories and their contribution as lyricists, as the writers for this song that I would write for them. We actually used their stories. We used things that they fought for to preserve. They talked about coming home to a safe house after having gone through warfare. And I had technical parameters as well. I knew their vocal ranges. I knew the kind of literature that they were singing, whether it was America the Beautiful or God Bless America. I did research. Many of them shared with me poetry that they had written in their youth, and it really provided me with a certain kind of vocabulary that I knew I had to wield. And it ended up being one of the most moving experiences that I've had in my entire career as a professional composer. One of my favorite things to do is to talk to kids, and the children's concerts at the DSO were no exception. You get to mix it up when you do children's concerts, and you get to take a little time even to explain what's going on in your music.
Maybe I can take you on a little journey with me to some place that's very beautiful on another side of the planet. Let's go all the way to South America. We're going to go to the beautiful country of Peru. And Peru is meaningful to me because this is where my mother is from. And in Peru, when the seasons change, we have huge thunderstorms. And so the kind of thunderstorm I want to conjure up for you is actually going to be one that uses the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, the string instruments, the woodwind, the brasses, the harp, the piano. I get to use all of these different sounds. But especially important to me are the instruments of the percussion section. So if you look towards the back of the hall, you look towards where Joe is standing with this stick. This is a special instrument known as the rain stick. What do you think it sounds like? Rain. Joe, can you demonstrate? Wow, so a thunderstorm is not a thunderstorm with just rain. We also need, well, we need lightning, we need thunder. So if you look towards where Josh is, he's going to give us our thunder sound.
The DSO chose a work of mine, 3 Latin American dances, the first movement of which has a lot of
wonderful percussion, as does the second movement and the third movement, that are really evocative of the seasons. So we were demonstrating instruments such as the conga and the gradated use of it. The thunder sheet is actually just a piece of metal that you can get from Home Depot and hang from the back of the wall. And by rumbling it and shaking it, it sounds like thunder. It's really quite wonderful, and I use it in almost every piece that has percussion in it. This composer's life is really interesting because you think that in the moment, as you address the needs of one residency or you're composing one particular piece, that you're just composing that piece and you're just dealing with the needs of that particular residency. But it's actually more like playing pool, where with one shot you're setting up the next two or three. And there are definitely things that I can point to, for instance, with the activities and the music that I wrote while in residence with Detroit Symphony that directly lend themselves to what I'm doing now a couple years later. One is I didn't anticipate founding a school. I've started the Gabriela, Lena Creative Academy of Music that is based here, but we have concerts around the country as well. And the aim for this is to help emerging composers of diverse backgrounds, white, black, Latino, whatever, to have a sustainable life as a composer, addressing the needs of a community. So art citizenship is something that's very important. And experiences like what I had in Detroit, where I worked with 6 kids, where I worked with hearing impaired black kids, or I worked with senior citizens, are things that my composers through my academy need to be ready for as well.